Alright guys, in this video I am going to be going over how I would program a workout, um, and I'll put it up here somewhere. The screen recording, I'm just going to draw all of this on my iPad. But yeah, today we are going to cover programming and some recommendations and how I would kind of think about it. So first of all, there are a few key things to consider. One is that from some studies, we do know that doing one set 3 times a week to failure compared to 3 sets 1 time a week to failure, the 1 set 3 times a week will cause growth, whereas the 3 sets 1 time a week, it at best maintains and probably loses some muscle. So we do know that we want to have as many first sets as possible. And there are a few ways that we can go about doing that. So you could train a full body split where you just do full body daily and you hit the majority of the muscle groups each day, and you could do that 3 times a week, so you get your 3 1 sets, which are going to cause growth. You could also do a upper lower where you train 4 times a week, and you would just have a little bit more variation. So you could do like your upper lower where you train 4 times a week, but you have maybe 3 different variations. So you would have upper 1, lower 1, upper 2, lower 2, upper 3, lower 3, or even 2 uppers back to back to hit different muscles. So you could program it out like that. For this video, we're just going to do an upper lower, and we're just going to do an upper 1, lower 1, upper 2, lower 2. So that way we can kind of split up some of the muscles, and we can also give ourselves a little bit more volume to work with. Volume is good to a point, but at the end of the day, mechanical tension is what is important. And the thing is, for you to create as much stimulus as the first set, so the first set would have its stimulus, you would have to do 5 more sets to failure, or to the same degree, to create a doubling of that stimulus. So while adding more sets is going to give you a benefit, it's a non-linear relationship. So you aren't going to be getting, the same degree each time. And we do know that for the most part, there really is no reason to do more than 4 to 6 sets per muscle per workout. Because you kind of get to a point where it plateaus, and then you could even end up regressing some of your progress and damaging it if you go past that. So we would want to adhere to these guidelines, right? And you also may be saying, like, why not just do 6 sets always? Because you don't have to. You don't have to. Like, you're still going to grow, and by doing more sets, you are going to accumulate more fatigue and cause more muscle damage. So it would take longer to recover, and that could be something that could get in the way of your next training. You're building up some fatigue, and then you're not able to work as hard as you would have been, and then you end up not moving as much weight, so on and so forth. So typically for beginners, a little bit more volume would be better. So like if you wanted to err on that 4 to 6 side, I would probably say 4 for like a beginner totally. And as you get more advanced, this is a contrarian belief, but you don't have to do as much volume when you get further into your training age, because you get stronger. You are able to, one, lift more weight, which is going to cause more damage. And you're not going to be able to recover as easily from the weight that you are having to move. So going down towards like 1, 2, maybe 3 sets when you get more advanced would be a good thing. And again, if you're training, you're getting first sets in 3 times a week, like you're still going to make progress. Or even with an upper lower, if you're getting 2 sets in per session, 4 sets total for the week, you're still going to be making progress, right? So now that we have kind of established that, we'll go ahead and put in here beginner, err on like the 4 set side. We'll do like 3 to 4 sets. And then for the intermediate / advanced, we'll go from the 1 to 3. One to 3 sets. Boom. So now that we have that, let's just go ahead and say we're in intermediate. If you're a beginner, you can just follow along and you can set this up with those guidelines, and you can obviously see how they feel when you work out, but you can just do a sample of this. So we're going to start with an upper 1. So when we're thinking about the upper, we're going to have a few muscles that we're going to have to hit. So we've got our chest, we've got our deltoids, which would be our shoulders. You've got your triceps, you got your biceps, you've got lats, traps, you can consider like your teres major, teres minor. Those are supporting muscles that are going to get hit, and I'll go over this and when we get to it. You've also got your forearms, but they're going to get a lot of work regardless. So you may be looking at this and we're like, okay, how do we hit all of these muscles, right? Do we have to do, if we're an intermediate, do we have to do 1 set for the chest, 1 set for the shoulders, 1 set for the triceps, 1 set for the biceps, so on and so forth? The answer is no. And that would be a lot, right? That's a bunch of exercises. You can't even isolate your teres major or teres minor because they're supporting muscles. Like they'll never be the prime mover of a movement. Anyway, regardless, so we'd want to look at compound lifts that hit multiple muscles. That's going to help us save some time. And we're also going to get more stimulus. And you can look at it as a little bit more beneficial to volume, and why you may not need to do as much. Because, for example, if you do a set of bench press, we're just going to say BP, bench press, you're going to hit your chest. You're also going to hit your anterior deltoids or your front delts. You're also going to hit your triceps, right? So we can do one exercise and knock that off. You could also do 1 set of, let's just say, a T-bar row. And in that, you're going to hit your lats, you're going to hit your traps, mainly your mid and lower traps, and you're going to hit some of your rear delts, right? So there we go. We've already knocked off 1, 2. You're also going to hit your teres major and your teres minor in there. You've knocked off your triceps. You've knocked off your deltoids. You've knocked off your chest. You're also going to be hitting your forearms when you do the T-bar row. And you can even say that you would slightly hit your biceps, but look at that. In just 2 exercises, we've crossed off the majority of the muscles on this list. Then we could do some extra work. So for example, if your lateral delts are lacking, and as you see, we haven't hit our lateral delts on this, then we could do like 1 set of, dumbbell lateral raises. And DB for dumbbell, lat raise. Boom. So there we go. Then we're gonna hit our dumbbell lat, or lateral deltoid, right? And then we could even throw in, let's say our biceps are lacking. We can even throw in, 1 set of preacher curls, right? And now we have covered that. And we've pretty much hit all of the muscles. We've hit all the heads of the deltoids. We've hit the chest, we've hit the lats, we've hit the trap, we've hit the forearms, we've hit all of the major muscles. So in these 4 exercises, we can just say, hey, we did enough. Or if you have another muscle, let's say your triceps are also lacking, then, you could do your 1 set of, dips. Or you could do 1 set of tricep pushdowns. But I'm trying to give you a little bit more of my thought process behind this, because we have our compound movements, and our compound movements are going to knock a majority of the bulk off. And also we could set these up in a way where the primary mover is the thing that we're trying to work. So for example, if you're doing like a bench press, then you'd obviously be mainly hitting the chest, but you're going to get some delt work and you're going to get some tricep work in there. But let's say you want to work on your shoulders, then more so your shoulders, and you could do your compound lift as like an overhead press, right? And if you do an overhead press, you'll get a little bit more. You could get a little bit of your lateral delts depending on how you do it. If you do a behind the neck overhead press, that's definitely going to hit a ton of lateral delts. An overhead press, it slightly work your upper pecs, depending on the angle that you have it on, if it's like strict up or if you're at a very, very slight incline. And obviously you're still going to get some tricep work, right? So this could be like our first workout. We could do, 2 sets of our compound movement and then 1 set of these accessory movements, right? Or we'll even throw in a 2nd set for the dumbbell lateral raise, because that is the only stimulus it's getting from this. And then that would just cover a workout. Now, you may be thinking, well, how do we go about choosing reps and stuff? If you look at the recovery data, for the most part, there really isn't a reason to go beyond 8 reps. If you are a healthy individual without injuries or joint problems, there really isn't a large reason to go outside of that rep range unless it's personal preference. And personal preference does play a big role, because typically when you train in a rep range that you like, you have more psychological drive or just internal motivation to work hard, so you end up pushing harder and actually training to get the proper stimulus, whereas in training in a rep range that you do not like, and you may end up cutting yourself short. So for the most part, we'll want to stick in the 4 to 8 rep range. And then we will take all of these exercises typically to a 1 RIR, which just stands for reps in reserve, or reps before failure. So we want to take all of these sets roughly to 1 rep before we hit failure. So I'll rewrite it just to make it better. So our first upper session, upper 1, would be bench press. And then you guys can choose the rep range. I'm just putting this 4 to 8 in here to give you a recommendation, but obviously you know yourself better than me and you know what your personal preferences are. If you haven't tried it, I would recommend trying it, see how you feel. But when you do higher reps, it does take longer for your body to recover from it. And when you do lower reps with heavier load, you get the advantage of going to a 1 RIR. Like if you were gonna go do 20 reps or high reps with a light load, you do need to take it to a zero RIR. Whereas heavy loads, you can get away with that 1 RIR. So if you were gonna go higher reps, I would recommend changing that to failure, but that is gonna cause a lot more fatigue and a lot more damage, and you're gonna struggle recovering from it. So it's dealer's choice ultimately, but you know what works best for you. I'm just trying to give you some information. So we'll do our bench press for 2 sets and then to a 1 RIR. Then we are going to do our T-bar row, and we're going to do 2 sets of those to a 1 RIR. Then we're going to do our dumbbell lateral raises and do 2 sets to a 1 RIR. Then we are going to do our preacher curls. One set to a 1 RIR. And then we'll do our dips. 1 set to a 1 RIR. And one thing, the dips, like you're going to be working the shoulder joint a lot. So, you know, when it comes to getting to the dips, if your shoulder maybe isn't feeling good, or it's just getting worked a lot and you're not used to working it, you can definitely just switch that out with a tricep push down. But that will be for there. So then going to a lower one. With the lower body, we do have the nice thing that a compound movement is going to cover a lot of different muscles. So we won't have to do as many exercises in our lower days, but there's typically a lot of overlap. So for example, like we could do a leg press, and we know our leg press is going to hit some adductors, it's going to hit some glutes, and it's going to hit some quads, depending on how high or low we place our feet. The lower we place our feet, the more quads it's going to bias. The higher we place our feet, the more glutes it's going to bias. Let's say we'll do the leg press with a quad bias. So we'll put low feet, quad. So we'll have our feet low, and then we'll do 2 sets to a 1 RIR. Right, so there we've gotten some glutes, some quad, some adductor. Then we could do a stiff leg deadlift. This is where you keep your legs straight. You don't want to bend your knees when you're doing this. Deadlift. And this is mainly going to hit your hamstrings. You're going to get a little bit of your erectors involved and a little bit of your glutes, but when you do the stiff-legged deadlift variation compared to the Romanian deadlift, stiff-leg deadlift hits more hamstrings, Romanian deadlift hits more glutes. So we're going to do 2 sets of these to a 1 RIR. And then if you wanted, you could do some glute work. You could also just, like the leg press is gonna hit quite a bit, and you're still also gonna get some work from your stiff leg deadlift, and you could just let that be enough for that session. And then the last exercise, I would do like a leg press calf raise. It's important that you do your calf raises with straight leg. Rather, you don't want a bent knee because it isn't really going to get your calf to grow. When you have a bent knee, it biases your soleus, which is more of a deep muscle, at least compared to your gastroc, and your soleus grows well in the bent knee, but your gastroc barely grows. And if you do it with a straight leg variation, your gastroc grows extremely well, and you get roughly the same amount of growth for your soleus. So we do want to make sure when we're doing calf raises that we have a straight leg and pretty much just never train it with a bent knee for the most part. And then we'll do 2 sets of these. 2A, 1R, I, R. Now, here's where, some of the variation is going to come in, because we don't want to do the same movements, and we want to challenge, different angles. So, if you're doing pulling and you're doing a T-bar row, you're going to be pulling more out, and you're also doing that row in the sagittal plane. So we're going to want to get a different row or a different type of pulling movement. So for example, for our back movement, and these exercises are in no particular order, I would recommend starting with your weak point, whatever muscle is, the one that you're trying to bring up when you're the strongest and you have the most energy. I would train it then, and then you can kind of put your exercise that, the muscle that needs the least amount of help last. You could set it up that way. Anyway, but yeah, these exercises aren't in any particular order. So we know we have that sagittal plane pulling movement. So we're going to do a frontal plane or a vertical movement. So we'll just do like pull-ups or assisted pull-ups or a cable pull down. I'm just going to write pull-ups here, but just know those are all viable variations. And again, we're just going to hit 2 sets to a 1 RIR. Now, when you do these pull-ups, like obviously you're still going to be hitting that teres major, teres minor. You're going to be mainly hitting your lats. You're still going to be getting some forearm work in. You could even say a little bit of rear delt. Like it's not going to be as much as when your elbows are higher or even at 45 degrees when you're pulling in the sagittal plane and at those elbow angles or the angles of abduction, whatever. That gets you more trap and rear delts work, whereas in the vertical pulling, it's primarily your lats that are going to be the main mover, and your teres major and your rear delts will do some stabilizing and some help. Anyway, so we'll do those 2 sets to 1 RIR, and this time we can go ahead and switch it up. We'll do a compound movement for our shoulders, and then we could do some isolation work for our pecs. So we'll do a overhead press, and we'll do this seated. That way we're more stable and we can push more weight. And there are, less, because there's going to be less stabilizers. Your abs aren't going to have to work as hard to keep you stable, so on and so forth. We'll do 2 sets to a 1 R, I, R. Then, we can get a little bit more bicep work, or we can also, do another rowing variation. So we did those T-bar rows. You could do just like an incline row, like on an incline bench. Whereas with those T-bar rows, you had your elbows out. We do it with like a 45 degree angle abduction, or just away from your body. So we'll do that incline. Forgive me if I don't have the proper names for all of the exercises. There's a lot of oddly specific names for each thing, but we'll just do on an incline bench with arms at 45 degrees. And, we can do 1 to 2 sets here, dealer's choice. And we're getting into a 1 RIR. Then, after this, we could hit some cable flies to get a little bit more pec work in. You could do these to bias the lower pec, middle pec, whatever you want to do. I'll leave this again up to dealer's choice. And whatever part of your pec you're struggling to grow, then I would put that in there. And we can just get, again, 1 to 2 sets, 1 RIR. And then the last thing, if you want to throw in, you could get a little bit more bicep work in if you would like. You also don't have to. Like you could run with this and you're gonna hit the majority of your muscles. Obviously there's going to be, more of a bias on growth for, since we're not gonna be hitting as many specific tricep or bicep movements. But even if you're like beginner intermediate, you're a beginner or a early intermediate, the main thing to really focus on upper body wise is your rowing and your pressing movements, because the compound movements, because they're going to do such a good job of hitting your muscles and getting you strength. This would be more so a session that I would maybe do for myself, because once you do get to a certain point, adding in some accessory work would be fun. Or if you just like to do that and would like a little bit more in your workouts to last longer. But there would be nothing wrong with just like choosing these 3 exercises and just not doing those and choosing like these 3 exercises and just doing those. But so there's I'll put a line here for like an open slot if you want to do that, but you don't have to. And then we'll go to our lower 2. This one, since we didn't really directly hit the glutes last time, we will want to do it. So we can go ahead and do a hip thrust. It doesn't matter which kind, if you have like the machine, if you only have dumbbells, if you have a barbell, as long as you can load it enough to get into a rep range where you hit failure, then that is what matters. And we'll do 2 sets of that to a 1 RIR. Then as far as we can do some leg extensions, because when we did the leg press, it doesn't really bias the rectus femoris as much, whereas the leg extension would. So this will be hitting a different part of our quads that doesn't really get hit well from those leg press. So we'll do 2 sets of that to a 1 RIR. Then we can also do a hamstring curl. You could do a seated or a lying down variation. This is because when you train that stiff-legged deadlift, you're mainly training the hamstrings at the portion of your hips, because your hamstrings, it crosses 2 joints, and so it has 2 functions. It is able to extend the hip. I may be mixing that up with flexion, but I'm pretty sure it's a hip extension. And and then it can also curl your leg. It can also pull at the knee to curl your leg up. So it has 2 different main functions that it can perform, since it's a biarticulate muscle, which it crosses 2 joints. Anyway, so we'll do 2 sets of that to a 1 RIR. And then again, we'll just do a calf raise, and you can do leg press again if you want, but just with a straight leg variation. It could be a donkey calf raise, it could be a standing calf raise, again, as long as the knee is straight. And boom, there we go. We have now finished a program. So Got our bench press, T-bar row, dumbbell lateral raise, preacher curls, dips, everything to a 1 RIR. That'll be our first day on. Then we'll have a lower one, which is just leg press, stiff leg deadlift, leg press, calf raise. And then you can just we'll go ahead and sneak a rest day in right there. So we'll have our first rest day of the week. Then we'll go into upper 2, which there's pull-ups, overhead press, seated, incline bench, rows with your arms at a 45-degree angle, and then some cable flies and an open slot if you want it. And then our next lower day would be hip thrust, leg extension, hamstring curls, and calf raise with a straight leg variation. And then we're going to have 2 rest days. And then we go back to upper 1. And then it'll be, so on, so forth. All right, but pretty much, I hope that makes sense. I don't know if I went over this as much. Pretty much we have like a few main muscles that, we need to hit. So we're going to have, let's go through it again. We have got traps, shoulders, biceps, triceps, chest, lats. We're going to have erectors, you could say that. You're going to get some work in them regardless. There are a few muscles that you just kind of hit, like your forearms, your teres major, your teres minor, your erectors, if you do some loading there. Then we've got our glutes. We have got our hamstrings. We have got our quads. And we have our calves. So, I mean, if you look at it, these are pretty much like our main muscle groups. And you can break some of these up, like this would be broken up into 3 with an anterior, a lateral, and a posterior. So front, side, back. Right, and your hamstrings could be broken up with a hip movement and a movement around the hip and a movement around the knee, with stuff like that. But anyway, so when we look at it, we can just hit some compound movements that just, cross out a few of these different muscles at once, right? So when we're planning like an upper, we can pretty much have 2 compound movements that hit the majority of the upper body, and then we can throw a little bit of accessory work and some muscles that we want to bring up or improve, right? And then our legs, we're pretty much like, you pretty much just hit them all regardless, because you hit a compound movement, which hits your quads. Again, depending on it, you can get some adductor work in, like if you do any kind of like pressing movement, right? But there's going to be like quads, glutes, adductors are typically going to work together unless you do like an isolation exercise, do a compound movement for like the hamstrings or the glutes. The hamstrings, especially, like if you work the hamstrings, you probably get some glute action in there if you're training it around the hip, and then you're also going to get some erector work if you do that as well. And then you can do some isolation work for the quads, and the calves are typically always going to be worked isolated. But again, yeah, that's kind of the main principle, is we pick our compound movements out to hit the majority of the muscle groups, and then we can just throw in some sets for some muscle groups that either did not get hit, a function of the muscle that didn't get hit, or we will choose on the next day or the next variation of that day to hit the different variation. For example, a sagittal plane row to a frontal plane row. You could also do that like with the hamstrings, with the movement. One day it's around the hip, and the next day it's done around the knee. And a similar thing with like the glutes and the rectus femoris and the other muscles in the quads. But yeah, that pretty much covers it. Like it's not rocket science here. At the end of the day, like we'll just stick with this, we'll train with it, we'll get strong, and then we'll at least want to stick with this for a month. But you know, the longer, stick with it a little bit longer, get more gains in it, get stronger in these movements. And then when you want to introduce something a little bit more novel, you want to switch up exercise selection to hit different parts of that muscle. Like for example, you know, you could be doing bench press and your middle pecs and your lower pecs could be growing really well, but your upper pec isn't going great. So then maybe we'll just, you know, switch it to an incline, and that way we bias our upper pec, right? And maybe our triceps get huge, and you know, let's say our rear delts really just aren't growing. Maybe we'll cut this out and then we'll just implement a rear delt movement. And it's more so you can like auto regulate and kind of switch these out, but at least stick with them for long enough to progressively overload them. And this is going to be a good proxy to measure whether you're actually building muscle or not, because the ability to progressively overload, or all that means is increase weight and or increase reps in same circumstance. So the same circumstance would be same amount of sets, same order in the exercise, same tempo, same rest period between sets. I don't know if I already said that. But if you are able to go from, you know, 135 by 6 from your last session, and then the next session you go to 135 by 7, and it's still a 1 RIR for both of these, then you know that you have gotten stronger and built a little bit more muscle, right? Or if you went from 135 by 6 at a 1 RIR, and then you went to 140 by 6 at a 1 RIR, we could say the same thing. And you progressively overload and you build muscle. And we stick with the same exercises because we ideally will be tracking. I know not a lot of people like to do this, but ideally we will be tracking our workouts, and we'll be tracking this data so we can see that. And then we're just going to stick with it to make sure that we are getting stronger. And when we are getting stronger, we know that we are building muscle. And that is what we want. So, anyway, I know I spent most of the time looking down. I'm going to put well, you'll see it. You don't have to worry about that. That covers a little bit. I know it was a little bit here and there. This was kind of impromptu. I decided that I wanted to do it today, and I didn't really prepare or like go ahead and already write all this stuff out and just go through it. But pretty much I just wanted to give you a little bit more about my thought process on how I would set these up and how I ultimately came up to my own programming for my own. Like for example, I can tell you what I'm currently doing is I have an incline bench press, then I do pull-ups, then I have preacher curls, tricep pushdowns, and dumbbell lateral raises. Then on my lower day, I'm doing leg press, hip thrust, stiff leg deadlifts, and leg press calf raises. And then on my upper two, I'm doing a sagittal plane row. It's not like a T-bar, but it's done to like a 45-degree angle. It's not on the bench press, it's on like a cable machine. I do an overhead seated press. I do cable flies. I did just like normal seated dumbbell curls. I didn't really throw in an extra, or no, I did do like a JM press for my triceps. Yeah. And then for the next lower day, I did a lying hamstring curl. I did barbell squat and calf raises. So yeah, then the rest and repeat. So that's pretty much how I set it up for myself. If you were to do the whole body daily, again, just compound movements, like you could pick a few from these. So you could do like your bench press, you could do a pull up, you could do a leg press, you could do a stiff leg deadlift and a calf raise, and you're hitting pretty much all of your muscles. And then for the next one, you could switch up to like an overhead press, you could do your T-bar row, you could do, you could switch to like a hip thrust, and you can do a leg extension, and then you could do your calf raises. But you could split it up kind of like that and get some variation in to make sure you're hitting different muscles in different ways and growing muscle in those different ways. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, then leave a like and subscribe. And if you found it helpful, also do that. And let me know in the comments, because I'm more than happy to make more videos like this where I just kind of sit here for 40 minutes, 30 minutes to an hour, and just like really go in depth, and also have the iPad that I'm drawing on and explaining a bit more about the knowledge while I'm going through it. And I will see you guys in the next video with a push workout. We're going into a deload week. I'm almost caught up with videos, thank God. And yeah, I will see you guys then.